Greetings, everyone, and it looks like myself and Tom are here to talk about some wacky Hollywood, or at least that was the original plan. But then we lost a legend today.
Yeah, we did. Well, kind of the end of an era, really, if you think about it.
It really is. I mean, Charlie had excused himself from the latest tour, and it wasn't without some concern because he'd had a recent medical procedure that he hadn't outlined. He hadn't told anybody about. This is heartbreaking to me because I'm such a music lover, and this is just hard. Some details from the story real quickly. We'll go through it, and then we'll say hi to everybody in the chat. But this was the breaking news of about 2 hours ago. About 2.5 hours ago. This was rough. Anyway, this is from Deadline, just because it's easy for me to get because they send me alerts and everything every day. Charlie Watts, the drummer whose beats powered the Rolling Stones for more than half a century, becoming one of rock's most iconic, if not stoic, figures, has died. He was 80. It's with immense sadness that we announce the death of our beloved Charlie Watts. He passed away peacefully in a London hospital earlier today, surrounded by his family. Charlie was a cherished husband, father, and grandfather, and also, as a member of the Rolling Stones, one of the greatest drummers of his generation. Watts recently dropped out of the group's upcoming U.S. tour after announcing that he was recovering from an unspecified medical procedure. An original member of one of rock's foundational bands, and the first of its founding members to die since the drowning of Brian Jones in '69, Watts has been with the Stones since the band's inception. After briefly playing on London's R&B club circuit, Watts joined forces with guitarist Jones and Richards and singer Mick Jagger in January 1963. And over the decade, would become one of the most influential instrumentalists in rock and roll. It's true. In announcing his decision to not join the band's this year's tour, Watts said, "For once, my timing has been a little off. I'm working hard to get fully fit, but I have today accepted on the advice of experts that this will take a while. After all the fans' suffering caused by the pandemic, I really do not want the many Rolling Stones fans who have been holding tickets to this tour to be disappointed by another postponement or cancellation. I have therefore asked my great friend Steve Jordan to stand in for me." Anyway, this was kind of a rehash of everything, but wow. What do you think, Tom? It's
too bad. I mean, we always constantly joked about how the Rolling Stones would be touring forever and all that kind of crap, and there's lots of jokes made about Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, but it's too bad. And I mean, I'm a big Stones fan, not as big as like the Beatles or some of the other bands of that era, but they're definitely a great band, and they have an endless amount of hits, and just thought they'd go on forever. It's just too bad. And welcome, Andre.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it only goes to show that nothing is forever, although one would think so in the case of the Rolling Stones. To be fair, though, it's Mick Jagger, first and foremost, that people thought would last forever. Same with his guitarists. It's like those two in particular.
Well, Keith Richards,
yeah, exactly. We're like the various substance content is higher than their blood levels in their blood. Those are like the ones that you thought would go on forever.
That's more so Keith. Like he's the one who's like, he got hit in the head with a coconut like 5 years ago and lived through it and all kinds of other crap.
Yeah, I feel bad for the coconut.
Well, yeah, so do I. I thought that he was invincible. I mean, many of these people, you think that, right? I mean, especially when it comes to the Stones. I have
to say though that Charlie Watts, like I remember, like he aged really badly up until the 90s, and then he stopped aging because he hasn't changed a bit the past 30 years.
Yeah, man.
I think that's kind of for the whole band.
Yeah.
Like they all kind of quit aging at like in like the 1990s. I think you're
right. Yeah, like they aged up, and like when they were in the 50s, they aged up until the 70s. It looked like that, and then they just stayed there.
Yeah, and we lost Don Everly a few days ago as well.
Yeah, I saw that 70s rock fan. This has been hard on music fans. The last few years has been a little rough.
As they say,
concerts and stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as you know, life is terminal. So
it is. Yeah, you have a death sentence. You just don't know when it is.
Yeah, that's true for everyone, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, we have so many people joining us today, but I hate that. I hate that we get to lead off the day with that particular story.
I could cheer you up. We got a Scotty Mendelson article.
Oh, do we? Hey,
yeah. Well, before that, let's just do it nice and say that we don't begin by mourning. We begin by celebrating his life and his music that we will have forever.
Yeah, and what an amazing catalog of music that he participated in bringing us. I mean, the Stones, man, they took R&B, they took an art form from some other group of people, let's say it that way, and took it to the next level and adopted it as their own. And they influenced rock and roll.
That's right.
As well as
a guy who looked like a white chick took music from black men and made it famous.
Well, I'm not going to say that. Charlie Watts is an incredible.
I'm not talking about Charlie. I'm talking about
Mick. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't really Mick, but yeah.
No, I do. Hey, allow me that joke. Huh?
All right. Well, very good. And we have so many great folks joining us today. Thank you for your participation here, everyone. But yeah, let's celebrate the giant catalog of music left behind to us. I mean, Sympathy for the Devil is something that is a song that you can't take away from, fans worldwide. You can't.
I think the bigger thing is just the fact that they were together for so long.
Yeah,
right.
Rare.
Most bands don't last more than 5 years, roughly 10 years at the most, and just the fact that the Stones have been rocking it for almost 50 years is crazy. Or has it been more than 50 years now?
Yeah, This is one that my dad and I, we dreaded for a very long time. It seemed like we would keep Charlie around.
I guess it'd be closer to 70 years now that I think about it, wouldn't it be?
Well, that would make him 10 when he started playing with them.
Well, no, like the 60s. Okay, it's 2020 now, so the 1960s is when they started. So
yeah, 63.
So 60 some years. Yeah. So I said nearly 70.
Yeah. Closer to 60, but to 70. But yeah, true. But still, for any band, that's a pretty impressive run, though.
I don't think they're incredible. I'm sure that's a record that can't be beat with the original members still. Because even the Beach Boys can't say that.
No, they took a hiatus. So did the Eagles, right? There were some bands that were together for a long time, but boy. I don't know.
AC/DC might be the only other one I could think of, maybe.
Yeah, well, sometimes you lose a band member and you can keep rolling.
Well, even with Brian Johnson, they've been together now for
a long time.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, R.I.P. Charlie. Look at this, yeah, guys.
Oh wow! I just heard back from Tommy McLaughlin.
Yeah, and losing the last, I think that was the last Everly brother, right? We lost him just Dan just a few days ago. So it's been a rough year, but again, beautiful catalogs of music from both of these bands. I'm sure the Stones will continue to play with Jordan as their drummer. Obviously, they're not going to stop the tour. So, but we just have to be prepared to lose, more and more of our iconic, influential musicians, and and more people that performed on screen. So, yeah. Richards did not even need makeup for his Pirates of the Caribbean role. Wow. That's probably true.
But yeah.
The world has been etched on Keith Richards' face for the better part of 2 decades. Like Andre said, somewhere around the 90s they just stopped aging. I thought the same thing about Bowie. You remember when we lost Bowie? It was the same thing.
Yeah, all of those guys, they aged right up until the 90s, and they arguably aged pretty badly.
I would argue that
there they stopped.
I was gonna say, I'd argue that Bowie didn't age until damn near before he died. Like when he got sick, then you could really tell. Like before that man looked really good for his age, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he looked really good like 5 years before he died. He didn't look.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Just as he started getting sick, then it started going downhill fast. But for a man of his age, you got to give him.
It's a shame that we don't know. It's a shame that we don't really know what was the medical procedure, and that he obviously suspected that he would recover. So that's just awful.
Well, at least they're not claiming it's Coof related.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You never hear that when it's somebody that falls within their.
Actually, they just had what's his face last week. I can't remember. It was some singer. It wasn't one of the Everly brothers. It was somebody else.
Yeah, if it doesn't fall within the bounds of something, they don't want to report it.
If it doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah.
And this is someone that was duly resilient. I want to put it in another term. And if you then succumb, even with that, then they don't want to give too much attention to it because it kind of doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun. But do celebrate him by listening to some Stones music. You can always find. I guarantee you can find one song from the Stones that you enjoyed over your lifetime, and take the opportunity to listen to that. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth your time.
Stone Cold makes a good point here.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah, it is. That's a great point. Bowie did know how to properly apply his makeup. He really did, man. Talk about just that guy was light years ahead of everybody else in music. I think it's like there are those of us that appreciated him then, but we were the lucky few. And then he got appreciated later on when we were just about to lose him. And that's just,
Bowie knew how to reinvent himself constantly. That was
he did.
And the Stones did that to a point too. Every so often, sure their sound didn't overly change, but they definitely kept up with the times.
They did. They had to. I can't remember. Was it the Danger Tour where they deviated pretty substantially from, their original types of beats and things? Yes, Keith Richards is still with us. That's a good way to look at things. Bowie is a god. That's true. So he didn't actually pass away. He's somewhere else. He went back to his home planet. But yeah, so yeah. Well, I tell you what. Let's move into what Tom shared with us. This is part of the wackiness of Hollywood. And Tom, if you wouldn't mind reading it, I'm going to bring it up for you. I'll make it as large as I can.
Scotty, I love Scotty. He's a funny guy. Besides using an icon for his picture that's probably 20 years old.
That's true. He doesn't age.
Yeah, bullshit. Even when he's making points, he's an idiot. But again, here we go with his take from Forbes, mind you, about how Snake Eyes marks 3 strikes and you're out for G.I. Joe. So G.I. Joe fans, according to Scotty anyway. Voodoo is reporting that Snake Eyes led the past week's video on demand charts, even if a quick glance at their site as of now, along with YouTube, Google, and Amazon iTunes, implies that its reign was short-lived. Paramount release earned just $28.14 million domestic and $36.84 million worldwide on an $88 million budget, and the film's alleged 45-day window was cut short entirely by obvious indifference to its theatrical existence. The Henry Golding-led original was always going to bomb, both before COVID and certainly during the pandemic. Well, there's a rosy outlook there, Scott.
But at least he's honest there, because I mean, yeah, the tracking and the projections looked bad even way before all of this came down. But yeah.
That Paramount moved the Skydance Hasbro flip straight into summer while delaying Tom Cruise's Maverick to November 17th told you what you needed to know about expectations and priorities. Regardless, Snake Eyes is the third straight underperforming G.I. Joe movie, meaning it might be time to give up. I talk a lot about franchises that are kept metaphorically alive past their prime, often despite audiences saying, no, thank you. That's doubly frustrating on a theatrical level, with theatrical moviegoing facing the biggest ever threat in the form of streaming and studios responding by rehashing franchises that nobody asked for and proclaiming those films as what you can only see in theaters. However, you can point to the once glorious run of the Terminator franchise. Even Rise of the Machines earned $433 million worldwide in summer 2003, when marketing was a lot cheaper and the DVD business was at its peak. Or the initial success with the RoboCop, Predator, or Alien franchises as reasons to give them another try. Okay, here's something about RoboCop that nobody really stops to think about. RoboCop is another one of those kind of like Predator and Terminator where it's only had one successful movie. Yeah. Like at the box office. It's never had a sequel that's gone anywhere beyond. I mean, even the second one kind of bombed. I like the second film, but it didn't do that well at the box office. And considering it was only like 2 years off of the original, that's saying something. But G.I. Joe is different in that we've had 3 big budget movies since 2009, and not a single one of them is qualified as an unmitigated success. For the record, Stephen Summers' G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra was and is painfully underrated. I don't know about that.
I could not disagree more.
Here we go with Scotty and his shit takes.
Yeah.
And they get worse as we go along, because I love this article.
That's not possible.
I mean, if there is one movie on this earth that is not overrated or sorry, that is not underrated or anything like that in any way, shape, or form, it's that one. But yeah. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, for the record, okay, here we go. I already read that. The initial reception was tarred by rumors of behind-the-scenes melodrama and Paramount's terrible choice not to screen the film for critics. No, that was not a terrible choice. That was probably by design. They didn't want the bad reviews out there. That's typical. The Rise of Cobra is very much Summers' remake of the first X-Men movie with sensibilities of the Mummy inside the G.I. Joe IP. It's bright, colorful, playful, violent, and large enough in scope and scale to see where the money went. It offers a diverse collection of colorful heroes, Channing Tatum, Marlon Wayans, Rachel Nichols, etc., and colorful baddies, Christopher Eccleston, Sienna Miller, and Lee Byung-hun. Notice they left out what's-his-ass. And plays like a prototypical MCU movie before Thor and Captain America got folks comfortable with not viewing their kid-friendly adaptations with a cynical eye. Imagine someone gave your childhood collection of G.I. Joe toys a $175 million budget, and that's a compliment. Unfortunately, that's not what they did. No. None of those films resembled G.I. Joe in any way. Like, that was, I remember, one of the biggest complaints. Like, it's not a G.I. Joe movie. It was more of a Mask movie than it was a G.I. Joe movie. What was that? Go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Even with lousy reviews, it opened with $54 million in early August 2009, partially because it was back when the mere idea of a mega-budget action fantasy based on a kid property was still somewhat of an event. Still, $150 million domestic and $300 million worldwide does not a new franchise make. Actually, back then, that wasn't too bad. And that just showed that there was interest in the G.I. Joe franchise. It just, the movie sucked. Especially with poor reviews and it's fine, whatever, word of mouth. After all, when you're franchise building, just making money or breaking even isn't enough. which is why we never got sequels to Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes or M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, excuse me. But in a world where IP-specific franchises were taking over, we still ended up with a sequel anyway. While fortunately keeping the continuity, I don't know about that, and Jonathan Pryce's U.S. president is Arnold Vosloo's Zartan in disguise, cliffhanger, G.I. Joe Retaliation was as much of a do-over as Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever. Again, Scotty with his comparisons.
His takes.
Yeah. Directed by John M. Chu, coming off of the first two Step Up sequels and the acclaimed, successful Justin Bieber Never Say Never concert documentary. That's something to brag about. G.I. Joe Retaliation was considered not a victory lap follow-up, but an immediate course correction. The smaller scale and more grounded actioneer cast Dwayne Johnson as the new protagonist and offered up Bruce Willis as the original Joe, back when Willis being in a theatrical action movie still mattered. It was delayed from summer 2012 to Easter of 2013 to give it an overseas-friendly 3D conversion. It also killed off Channing Tatum's Duke in the opening reel, which seemed smart until Tatum finally broke out 6 years after first Step Up with 21 Jump Street, The Vow, and Magic Mike.
Well, to be fair, you can't fault the studio for that, because they cast someone who, honestly, in my opinion, completely sucked in the role. And yeah, he was someone that would do really good later, or at least for a very limited time. But they didn't know that at the time, and even then, he was a wrong fit for the role he was cast in.
I agreed. He was a leading man who wasn't quite ready yet.
He wasn't a leading man material, and he still isn't. You have to keep in mind, the times when he was at his best, it's still an ensemble of pieces with others.
You're not wrong, but I still don't. I feel like he never quite got the right vehicle. I mean, 21 Jump Street was kind of like the direction he should have went, right? Like he should have went with that I'm the big dumb jock kind of goofy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's got a great sense of humor.
Oh yeah. Comedic roles. That's for instance,
at the World's End, he's fucking hilarious in that.
Yeah,
and especially in 21 Jump Street Part 2, like that one scene with when he realizes that Schmidt effed the captain's daughter. I mean, that's one of the scenes that made him. So he has a great comedic timing when he wants to, and when he can. Absolutely no argue there at all. But he was. Yeah. He was wrong for that particular role.
I don't know if I call him an action star, but a leading man is totally different. Yeah.
But of course, that's all on Summers, because he's the guy who miscast him to begin with. I mean, ultimately, this is one thing that I find so infuriating with Hollywood in a sense, is that the audience has voted and the audience doesn't want this. How different do you think it would have been if Summers had gone full G.I. Joe that the audience knows, the 80s iteration of it, and done it right the first time around when they made the first movie? How different would the franchise not be today if that had happened?
Wow.
Because that's where it stepped wrong. I mean, that's the place where the franchise stepped wrong, and they tried to course correct, didn't go far enough, still kept Still kept the plot threads from the first and disastrous movie, and it got off on the wrong foot, and the audience never forgave it. It tried to course correct when it needed another 5-10 years, and then reboot again. That's what was needed. So I would say that failure is entirely on the studio, and actually on Summers for screwing the franchise over with that first movie.
Yeah, because I'll argue that G.I. Joe is a very, very lucrative franchise still. Like, the fact that the toys still fly off the shelves and stuff are proof of that, right?
100%.
Okay, where was I here?
Film
was slightly bigger success, earning $122 million domestic, but a better $253 million overseas, for a $376 million worldwide finish, with a decent 2.7 times its $135 million budget. However, Retaliation got worse reviews than Rise of Cobra. Few folks walked out of either film excessively jazzed for the next installment. Moreover, the $53 million crossed in China was, as is often the case, a mirage. tricking the studios into thinking that the new movie was bigger success than it actually was. Take away China, and you have a mere 7% global upswing, and every reason to think the third time would crash, like the rebooted X-Men movies, the Terminator reboot attempts, and the Divergent series. Nonetheless, we ended up with a third G.I. Joe movie. This time, a reboot centered on a before he was cool Snake Eyes origin story. A promising not a white guy leading man was plugged into a doomed unrequested relaunch of commercially questionable IP. No, I think the thing is people were more upset about the race swap. But anyway, one that rebooted the continuity, thus alienating those who liked the first two, which was nobody, and spent the runtime on a story that would set up Snake Eyes, you know and love, for the surely inevitable sequel. As such, this doomed first movie is just the prologue. Sorry, not prologue. Yes. Franchise starter that was like every other failed Batman Begins wannabe over the last 15 years. Think Fantastic Four, Gem and the Holograms, Artemis Fowl, Pan, Robin Hood, and Solo, a Star Wars story. However, the 2005 Fantastic Four movie earned $330 million on a $100 million budget. Okay, I don't know why this is what this is why I sent this article to Andre.
Wow.
He brings in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. That movie came out 30 fucking years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why anyone would bring that up in any context, circumstance whatsoever.
Exactly. Like, out of nowhere, he brings in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which was a huge success, and they didn't plan on making it a franchise. It was never meant to be a franchise. I don't even know why he brought it up here. It was a vanity project for Kevin Costner. Let's be real.
And
wow.
It's still one of his best movies. You can't really blame him for that.
Don't get me wrong. Let's be real. What was it? It was never meant to have Robin Hood 2, the second Prince of Thieves. It was just meant to be a one and done. It was a big old vanity project for Kevin Costner to spend a bunch of money and try to think he could do an English accent. That's all it was. And then he brings up Hook, another movie that's 30 fucking years old. It was never meant to be a goddamn franchise.
And not only that, it was overwhelmingly popular at the time.
What the fuck, dude?
Over the last 15 years, Hook was
30 years ago.
How is he doing?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Where is he getting this from?
I don't know. I don't know, but you know
what?
He's
trying to compare it to them trying to do the Pan reboots and the Robin Hood reboots. Look, those shouldn't even fucking be in there, Scotty.
But look. Willie has a theory. Willie has a theory for $5 super chat. It says, please. Crazy theory that Mendelsohn is actually a computer program.
Yeah, it's an AI, and there's a glitch in the Matrix.
There's definitely a glitch in his Matrix. No human being can be that stupid and not be a recipient of a Darwin Award.
What he's trying to do here, but his point is lost in the mix. Because Robin Hood and Hook are based on two properties that are Pan is not technically public domain, but it damn near is. Robin Hood is. They have done half a dozen different Robin Hood features between Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and the one he's talking about, right?
And none of them were better, incidentally, also. But yeah,
think about how many times they've taken Alexander Dumas's books and repackaged them. Right? You had, the Three Musketeers. You had
the Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh gosh, that's another.
The Man and the Iron Mask.
He's comparing cartoon and comic book franchises to stories that have been around for hundreds of years.
Arthurian level tales that have been around for centuries.
Peter Pan technically is, but point being, I think there's aspects of Pan that are public domain. I'm not 100%.
This guy's a knucklehead, though.
Anyway, so moving on, he goes, Star Wars is Star Wars. So yeah, he was trying to make this point with it, but it's lost in the mix. But G.I. Joe has never been a successful cinematic franchise. Not even a decade ago, when mere idea of such a thing would be special or unique. G.I. Joe peaked with $376 million on a $135 million budget. Despite terrible reviews and indifferent reception. Why did I even say inception? There wasn't even the excuse of, We got it right once to justify the expense. Okay, that's the point he's trying to make with Hook and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. But guess what, Scotty? Those are two of the worst examples you could have used. Because again, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, the only reason that movie was big was because of Kevin Costner and that fucking soundtrack and the way it was marketed. Hook, same goddamned thing. You had Steven Spielberg making a movie with Dustin Hoffman as Hook and Robin Williams as old Peter Pan. The gimmick was there. It had nothing to do with the property that it was making, more so than it did just the gimmick of having that going with it. You know what I mean? Like he's making a very bad comparison here. I get what he's trying to do, but it's not clicking. It's not connecting. Anyway, he just goes on.
It's probably a rushed article. Probably
it is like
it's probably a quote. It probably has a quota, and it's like, shit. I owe them an article by tomorrow. How do I conjure up the minimum amount of words needed? Okay,
I get the point he's trying to make here. These franchises like Peter Pan and Hook, you know, Hook worked. It made money. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves made money, but these reboots they tried to attempt in the recent years did not. Well, those two shouldn't even be in that list, as far as I'm concerned, because they're not even in the same category as the other shit. Fantastic Four has never really had a franchise before. Gem has never really had a franchise before outside of its initial run. Same thing with, Solo, a Star Wars story. That's the first time we've ever had spin-off movies from Star Wars, right? Those movies make sense if you're going to compare them to the initial franchise runs. But right. Robin Hood and Pan should not be in there.
No,
and that's the ones he's trying to make the actual comparison to.
And first of all, both of them are older than the window, he said, in the last 15 years. I'm like, dude, you can't compare. These are apple and oranges things. I mean, he's trying to compare superhero films to,
the Fantastic Four one he has here is the only one that makes sense, right? But that one's even kind of tangential because that's the first time in history that we've ever had a released Fantastic Four movie, and it was in the midst of the X-Men Spider-Man craze.
Right. Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
And the second one was released in the middle of the Marvel age, right? So he is conflating so much shit here. It's not even funny. Because he's not wrong. G.I. Joe is a failed franchise, but not for the reasons that he's bringing into this. But I know Andre's got a lot to say about this, so I'll finish this up real quick. But okay. G.I. Joe has never been a successful cinematic franchise, not even a decade ago, blah, blah, blah. I already said that, all that. That's basically what the point he's trying to make there, and failing horribly. With Snake Eyes limping to PVOD weeks ahead of the even truncated 45-day window, it's time to acknowledge that not every popular kid's toy is the next Transformers or the next Iron Man. Just because Batman Begins earned $372 million while The Dark Knight topped $1 billion doesn't mean every soft-ish franchise launcher is going to lead to a break. Scotty, how many times I got to tell you this when it comes to Batman? He likes to use Batman Begins a lot of times. Notice that?
Yeah,
not just in this article, but other articles. Batman Begins, the only reason it didn't gross as much as the other two films was because there was a bunch of people who thought it was a sequel to Batman and Robin.
Yeah, this is true.
When I rented that film out at the video store, people were constantly saying, like, they didn't want to see it. I'm like, you should check it out. You should check it. I'm like, I didn't like the last one. I'm like, no, it's nothing to do with those. Everybody still thought it was tangentially connected to the Tim Burton film.
Everyone thought it was a prequel.
Exactly.
Not everyone, but enough people thought that it was a legit prequel that it negatively affected the box office.
Yeah.
They should have never called it Batman Begins. It should have just been called The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been...
Or The Dark Knight Rises. That would have been better.
Well, you had The Dark Knight Returns, and The Dark Knight Rises. That's what it should have been. Yeah. Because that was the problem I had renting it. And I shit you not, 90% of the customers I came across did not want to pick it up because they thought it was a prequel to the other films. And they fucking hated Batman and Robin.
But you can't blame them. I mean, that was
no, not at all.
Terrible.
I literally, I would play it nonstop in the store just to prove to people. I'm like, no, see, it's nothing to do with the other movies.
Right.
Yeah, and but again, that's like a marketing fail that had like massively failed to communicate to the audience. This is not a prequel. This is a complete and total restart. I mean, at the time, reboots weren't that familiar, so I was honestly surprised by how many people genuinely thought this is a prequel. This is going to lead straight into the Tim Burton Batman. I mean, of course, yeah, many people knew, but so many more people than you'd think didn't realize that.
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding with the Dark Knight's box office, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that was the first $1 billion superhero
It went
movie.
a long way in clearing the brand.
It did. And that brings us to Snake Eyes. I think the biggest problem with Snake Eyes was there was a lot of people who probably thought it was a prequel to the other G.I. Joe movies or didn't care because they didn't like the other G.I. Joe movies. I mean, we live in this world where, and that goes to my point exactly with this Batman Begins thing, is even though that was almost a decade off of Batman and Robin, you still had people, with the problem of differentiating, is this a reboot or whatever? And now here we are again with another reboot, and we're barely, not even 10 years off of the last G.I. Joe movie?
Yeah.
The first one.
I feel like, and I'm sorry, Andre, but I feel like they systematically destroyed the potential for G.I. Joe.
Oh, they did. Totally.
Well, I want to let Andre. Yeah, I want to let Andre.
No, go ahead, Andre.
Because he's got to go soon.
Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please.
Absolutely. Again, this is what I find like so frustrating, because this is like the standard thing. This is a Hollywood spokesperson and Hollywood mouthpiece blaming the audience for the mistakes of the studios. Like, the audience has voted. No, the audience was given shit product 3 times around. Because that's what happened with G.I. Joe. In the right hands, G.I. Joe, I firmly believe, can do amazing. The fan base is huge, not just in the US, but internationally as well. However, the fans are very specific. They know what they want. And they want a fairly truthful adaptation of the 80s iteration of G.I. Joe. And yes, that's kind of what we've gotten, but it hasn't been close enough. And on top of that, the movies have just been crap story-wise. So again, I will say it started off on the wrong foot. It was such a bad foot that there was no fixing it. There was no course correcting as they tried to do with Retaliation. No, they had to give it a decade and then do a complete clean reboot because there was no other way of doing it. Instead, they gave us a Retaliation, and now they gave the complete reboot. But the problem is that this, what this movie reminds me of, how it's like marketed? X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Yeah.
This is like X-Men Origins Wolverine all over again. But again, that wasn't a reboot. That was a prequel. And this thing right here, it's been sold in every single way as a prequel to what came before. I mean, from the trailers and everything I have seen, nothing at all has told me that this is a reboot and it marks a complete break. And this is basically the Casino Royale and Batman Begins of a new G.I. Joe franchise. That has never been communicated to the audience.
Which is kind of what they did with Bumblebee. And they kind of fumbled on that one too, if you ask me. And I finally watched that movie. It wasn't horrible.
Yeah, what do you think about it?
It wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible either. I mean, I thought it did a good enough job of rebooting things while still keeping it tangentially connected to the other films.
Yeah, because that's a movie that depending on how they choose to proceed, they can say that either it's a prequel or it's a reboot. That actually works both ways, so you can go both directions with it. But mostly, I think that it turned out that it's a prequel. But again, same problem, because there you have like one big Hasbro movie that is being built as a prequel. It kind of is a prequel. And then with G.I. Joe, you have something that's sold in exactly the same way as Bumblebee. Only this is then supposed to be a clean break in a Casino Royale and Batman Begins. Only it isn't marketed as that. It's marketed as a prequel. To a franchise, or to an iteration of a franchise that people are way done with.
Yeah, and Andre, you're right on point. I don't think that anybody in the audience realized that, because maybe you saw it distinctly different with Casino Royale being kind of a different direction for Bond, but I believe some in the audience didn't catch it from that first film. I think only eventually they realized they were watching Jason Bourne is James Bond later on.
Yeah,
but yeah. I mean, that was the beginning of the slide for me for Bond, actually.
Well, and it goes along with Spider-Man too. right? Like there was a lot of people that were still very confused by the whole Spider-Man thing.
Yeah, but I agree with Mexican Iron Man, who sends us a $5 super chat here. Says, we need Midnight's Edge Publications International. These columnists like Scotty are out to lunch. So it sounds like, Andre, you're going to launch another enterprise? Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I'd like to launch one enterprise at a time. So after Midnight's Edge Español is at least 10,000 subscribers, then we'll see.
Yeah, and I think you're
making other
inroads.
channels, and I know we've been talking about a website, but that's definitely in the cards.
Yeah, I think you're making inroads in that direction, my friends. So, but a couple of super stickers came in. Makani Draws sent me, my little buddy, my little pal, my little Shiba Inu dog. I appreciate that. Writing a number 1 on a piece of paper. Thank you for that. And then, of course, Scotty sends us the hot dog. Thank you for that, Scotty. And then we had Mexican Iron Man. So I'm caught up on the supers, but so Scotty missed the mark in just a spectacular way as usual. But he did properly identify the fact that I think G.I. Joe needs to, as Andre said, to take a very, very long break. And if you're going to do this with any franchise, I think you have to have an origin film that introduces the characters properly and not try to just have a solo film that brings the characters in one at a time. It worked for Iron Man, but that's one of those rare things. You need to kind of bring the team in, introduce the first elements of the team, I think, to get a better reboot. I mean, you need to start to establish these characters with these identities, and the problem is they veered so much away from what the identities of these characters or this particular character in this film was. I mean, we'd been hearing for a long time that they were headed the wrong direction. So,
absolutely, and also, if they were going to market it this route and everything, I think it's like a really bad idea to use Snake Eyes of all people, because he is someone that at first glance you can't tell the difference between this rebooted Snake Eye and Snake Eye from the earlier iterations. Yeah, of course there's Storm Shadow, but you have to go and actually see the movie to be able to tell the difference between this Storm Shadow and the Storm Shadow we've seen before. If you ask me, I vastly prefer the previous Storm Shadow, but that's me.
Well, and Andre, I mean, honestly, they could have treated this character with more reverence and never had him take his mask off, and it wouldn't matter who played the character, right?
Well, I think they made a point out of it.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Because they've gotten like so. I think that they noticed that, oh shit, look at what happened with Warner when they cast a white guy as Iron Fist, who is a white guy in the comics. They were like true to the comics, but now it's like white people can't do martial arts because that's appropriating Asian culture. And I think that's like the only reason why they did that. But in so doing, even more of the people that they needed to appeal to, they're just going to turn away. And speaking of that, I do not mean to turn away, but I really have to be off here.
Thank you very much, Andre, for joining us for the
absolutely. It's my pleasure always.
Yeah, no, it was great. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Anything you want to tell everybody about on the way out the door, sir?
Yeah. I want to say, hit like, share the stream, and subscribe to CultureCasino, one of the greatest YouTube series, and great and someone we really, really respect and enjoy hanging out with. And you'll be both on Midnight's Edge After Dark in a few hours, won't you?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I have an obligation, but I'm hoping to join. Absolutely, I love joining you guys every opportunity I can. So yeah,
I'm down to Jesse this week, so I need some help.
Oh, okay. All right.
He's on vacation.
I'll slide in there.
Yeah. All right, take care, everyone.
Take care.
Yeah,
thank you, Andre, again. Have a great day.
So on with the other news that you wanted to discuss.
Oh no, that was better than the news I wanted to discuss. And as Sander Hammerslag says here, they STD and Picard failed, but they still keep making seasons, and that's I don't know. It's hard to justify $150 million for a film anymore. I think they're gonna have a really hard time in the future with how much.
Well, I think this is more of a Paramount problem than it is across the board. I mean, I know what Scotty's trying to say with this editorial or whatever, but he misses the mark, and he could have made a point with it. He could have, and I have a feeling Andre will make an editorial that will fix what he's saying. But yeah, I mean, and then this is also coming off the cusp of the guy who's the head of the theater organization talking some more smack.
Oh, look, and let's get into that because that's where we're headed, guys. Is
All
this
right.
conversation? Here we go. Tom read my mind. Simultaneous release does not work, declares NATO's John Fithian. AMC boss Adam Aaron tells studios show movies in theaters first.
Well, he's not wrong, but let's hear what you have to say, Culture.
Look, this guy, as goofy as he is 1,000% accurate. You can't even imagine how many of these people got up on stage at CinemaCon this last weekend.
And I wish I was there, guys. I could have saw Ghostbusters.
There, yes, and you would have seen if you would have been able to authenticate whether or not the leak was true with the Spider-Man trailer, right? So, because that was also shown here, but this guy here, I mean, he was a long line of these people, and these people are executive level humans that are saying these things need to go to theaters. The studios are failing miserably, performing badly because they are taking them to the streaming platforms. I can't even. I don't know. I mean, I can't disagree with this man. In this article, this is again following the MPA's chairman, CEO Charles Rivkin. John Fithian comes out there along with, and then later, I guess, circuit boss Adam Aaron, who was the Sony guy. They continued the patriotic messages for theatrical exhibition about how they are essential, to a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yeah, and Fithian exclaimed, "We will rise again after the pandemic that has crippled our business, not to mention an entertainment industry intoxicated on theatrical window crushing." Yeah. Exclusive release periods remain vital to the success of the theatrical business, of course, emphasized the NATO chief, while applauding filmmakers who embrace the big screen and don't believe that movie theaters are a thing of the past. Of course, these are, images of Tenet and Tenet filmmaker Christopher Nolan and Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins were splashed up on the screen at that point. Of course, all of this stuff is a different form of propaganda, but it's a little inside baseball for all these people. And to make one thing crystal clear, the best work that they make is made for the big screen. Leading creatives know better, and they are on the right side of history. I hate that quote because we hear it way too often. Anyway, he goes on and on, and then he eventually slams Disney during the second weekend of Black Widow. Of course, they did that in real time when this happened, when Black Widow dropped 69%, which is the worst for a Disney-released MCU title, attributing the loss to the picture's availability in homes on the studio streaming service. And in closing, Fithian said, "We are entering a great era of experimentations. Movies that were starting to shy away from theatrical release will grace our screens again. Customers want more options. Our members will redefine what the theatrical experience means." Of course, they've already been doing that for a couple decades now. Cinema is much more than a passive form of entertainment. It's immersive and life-changing. Not to mention, if you go to one with a really good restaurant, that's awesome. People around the world had movies taken away from them and are longing for a return to the theatrical experience. That longing was palpable. The sense of community that the cinema creates is more important than ever. I can't argue with him. But again, I mean, he wasn't the only guy there, Tom. I mean, that was doing this. I mean, you had Illumination Studios saying that without theatrical releases, the notion of a movie may begin to slip away, and that's not wrong. I mean, this is the guy from Illumination. The guys that do the little yellow guys, right? The little minions. They give you Gru and stuff like that.
This
and then
kind of goes to what I was saying before: is take all your personal stuff away from this stuff. Like, however you feel about the theater doesn't matter. And I know in some places it looks like theaters have been closed for over a year and they're never opening up again. But in other areas, they are booming. And as I pointed out many, many, many times, the theaters are proving to the studios that they need the studios a hell of a lot less than the studios need the theaters right now. And that's going to become more prevalent as, things start to open up, if we're lucky enough and they don't try and close us down again. But, like that's a whole nother discussion.
It is. It is.
Yeah, yeah. But in this case, I will say that I'm confident in that a lot of what they're saying here is not wrong. And eventually the studios are going to come around because they're going to realize that they're shooting themselves in the foot in the long run. Yeah. Now, again, we can gripe all we want about certain aspects of the theaters, but I always remind people a lot of the problems most people have with the theaters are the studio's fault. Yeah. And when the studios pulled this shit, they thought they were going to cut the theaters at their throats. And instead they left them for dead. And now they're dealing with a John Wick scenario because these motherfuckers are stronger than they were before this crap. And they've got a lot more sway as opposed to the way they were before. They had them under their thumbs. And if the studios would have done what I said at the beginning of the pandemic, then they would have still had the theaters under their thumbs. But now that's not the case.
No, and you're going to start to see the deals that were closed with Universal and AMC. You're going to start to see those fray around the edges, and you have theaters. They're leaner, meaner, stronger. They're looking at their business differently once again. I agree with you, Tom. If they are going to be in control of this, because the studios are going to have to return to theaters if they want to make profitable films, because you can't spend 150 $200 million, which seems to be the norm for most of these tent poles now, and make money and release them on a streaming service. You can't even justify the growth in subscribers. You can't.
No, because you'll be the first to tell people a lot of these services are a good 3 to 5 years away from being extremely profitable.
In fact, they're even longer now because the consumers just think about this. Stepping back, consumers now know they don't have to sign into a long-term contract. So they're on the hook for 1 month or 2 months at a time to watch whatever show that they think is worth their $15 a month or whatever it is, right? And then they can cut ties, right? So they've consumed a whole lot of your product, way more than you can imagine, and stepped back. And your ARPU numbers don't justify that kind of thing. Whereas a theatrically released film and its natural progression through all of its cycle makes you a profit all along the way at every single stop along that particular train track, which is the analogy you like to use. And I just I don't know. It makes no business sense. This is one of the reasons I got into YouTube the way that I did, because none of it makes any sense. I mean, you guys talk about it all the time on all of your channels, and I always try to make sense out of it, and I just can't. I like to say, okay, this isn't going to be what you want it to be. That's why I agree with you, Tom. I think the theaters are in a position of power. They just need to seize it. So,
yeah, and I mean, we're looking at a change, and these things are long overdue. The studios and the theaters have always had this tense relationship, right? And when they get together and they work well together, well, it's fireworks for both ends. But when they don't, it's a pain in the ass for everybody, right? It's
go back to 1980. From 1984. You started to see the relationship with the studios and the theaters start to really grow, right? They started to grow together, so that by the time Batman 89 came out, you had massive promotions on a scale you'd never seen before.
Well, right? What you had happen was you had the rise of the mall with the multiplex.
Sure. But you also at the same time, and you had standalone buildings too, in the strip mall kind of stuff. But you had a level of promotion cooperation between the theaters and the studios that did pretty well from the 90s. And I need to take myself off screen. From the 90s through probably about 2005.
Well, here's where it gets funky, because it started with like what I was bringing up with the whole multiplex thing, because that's where things got a little bit dicey. Is you had the video era pushed this idea that, oh, we have a secondary market now for films beyond television. We got to get more movies out there. So they went from the average studio releasing, 12 pictures a year to twice that, to now I think it's quadruple that, because I think the average studio releases, 40 to 50 movies a year, if not more,
through their various elements.
Yeah, so like that is insane. I mean, that used to be the amount of movies we get each year, right? Like the amount has just astronomically gone beyond what we've ever seen before, and that's theatrical distribution for the most part I'm talking about. And so you have this crazy amount of movies, so the studios would keep pumping out more movies, and the theaters could keep pumping more movies in, and for a while it worked out okay. But the theatrical, the whole reason it worked before is because you would put movies out there, and even if they were movies that weren't big hits, they at least were given long enough time to make a decent amount of money in the box office, to where the video return on it would generally, like most of these movies in the past, like you're bringing up from the 80s and 90s, they didn't have the kind of bombs they had now.
No, like, because a lot of these films didn't cost that much money. Think about it. When Disney brought in their different nameplates, because that's what I'm going to call the boutique studios that these studios set up and then built, right? Yeah, I mean, you had Hollywood Pictures, and of course with you had TriStar came from another place. You had all these different elements that kind of started to release these films that were having, some stars that were going to break away. And, it was a film along their pathway to becoming, movie stars like Tom Hanks and stuff like that. But at the same time, they were doing it for these not huge budgets. They had quality stories. They were telling great stories. And that was I think the substantial change from that period of time. But you had, again, cooperation with the theaters and the studios that grew. So, but I think we both are on the right track as far as that goes. So, but you're right. I mean, now when you start to see like Disney with their nameplates now releasing, well, how many Marvel films were they releasing? It was like, what? It was 4, 5, 6 a year at times.
Well, they wanted to get up to 4 at one point, but they had been doing 2.
Yeah.
And I think they're managing to get 3 out this year.
Yeah.
4 if you count Spider-Man, I think.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And then you know, this in the big push to get a Star Wars film out every year was dumb. Right. You have to take a rest between things, and that's just, they're just not allowing for it anymore. They're trying to burn through stuff that they can keep as popular as possible. Speaking of popular things, Lola Meets is here with a very popular icon, guys. So hi, Lola, it's good to see you. Appreciate you being here. Mecha J, you're 1,000% right. Thank you for that. Saying the studios did.
I love how Olivia Imakara brings up Heaven Gates. Well, that's the thing. The studios didn't have a lot of those kind of pictures back then. Now we've got Heaven's Gates every year, right? You got to look at it this way. Because back then that was just insane. They never spent that kind of money on movies. You know, even Terminator 2 was a big ass gamble.
Yeah. Huge.
Even like movies like Ghostbusters were a little bit kind of dicey, because that was like a $30 million budget in 1984. And everybody was like calling it Columbia's folly because they thought it was going to bomb at the box office. And they're like, it's never going to make its money back, because that was an ungodly amount of money to technically spend on a comedy at that point. But
they were wrong at every point in the early days of these new tentpoles, right? Because I mean, Terminator 2, they were wrong about that film for how much money that cost. I mean, you and I have talked about some of these exorbitant budgets compared to the other things that were being made at the time.
Jay, I'd like to know where you got the numbers for that, because I mean, yeah, I'm not sure that's accurate at all.
Well, that would be interesting to take a look at and break down. They only increased production by 30%.
I don't know about that, because you had the average studio released 12 to 14 pictures.
The big six. Okay, I see what he's saying. No, and that's the thing. You have to consider they all had these new nameplate studios.
Well, that's what you were talking about. Culture is like,
yeah. You know, I mean, you can take it away from there, but you know, Hollywood Pictures. What were
there
the
was
Disney
Touchstone,
ones?
there was Hollywood.
Hollywood. Yeah,
they brought in Miramax and Dimension.
Yeah. TriStar.
Then TriStar was actually bought up by Columbia.
Yeah. Columbia Pictures was, and all that became part of the Sony Picture stuff.
And then MGM had United Artists that they picked up. And then
you had a lot of those.
And Orion
those
after a while.
That he's saying that includes the nameplates. I'm gonna have to do some research. I'll take your word for it at the moment, but I'll look it up.
Well, because I'm going off of the average studio released 12 to 14 movies a year in the 1970s. By the time you get to the 2010s, the average movies released in a year is 52. So that's like a movie a week
for each of the big. Wow, that's amazing.
But you also have to figure in there. Does that include straight to video stuff though, J Element? And that's also the thing is there was no straight to video market until the 80s.
Columbia released 209 films in the 1970s. Hickey schmick.
Yeah, that's 10 years though.
Yeah, it is. So break that down. 209 divided by 10. But what is that?
I don't know. Math is racist.
Oh. Anyway, moving on. Thank you for that, Jay. Orion, New Line, Carlco, Canon, Hemdale. Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, this is the time also you had, this is when Miramax was growing, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is you had like a lot of the grindhouse studios that went from being, the B pictures on like drive-in features and stuff. And those were the guys who turned around and like the Cormans and all those guys who really got into the straight to the video days. And
right.
Charles Band and that kind of stuff really did a lot of that kind of stuff. So you had a whole new like industry inside of that industry.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting with 21 films in a 10-year period. Or excuse me, 21 films a year in a 10-year period. That's pretty decent chunk of change.
Yeah, that's pretty close to what I said. I said roughly about 12 to 14 on average.
Yeah, it's just Sony, Columbia, TriStar, Screen Gems reached 186. Wow. See.
That seems like an awfully low number.
Yeah, I will go through and do everything because I'd like to get a clean breakdown of all that. That'd be interesting. That's the kind of stuff I find interesting. Everybody else goes, "You're nuts." Diego, hey, what's up?
Diego? Yeah, like Willie said, is that counting direct to video? Because that seems like an awful.
Oh, Disney made a metric butt ton of direct to video stuff back then. Holy cow! Culture, but also there were different budget, tax incentives, inflation, rising costs, and land. Absolutely, that's absolutely true.
Oh yeah, the cost of how you make a movie has changed dramatically over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, 20, 21 films a year. So that's pretty.
Well, yeah, because even studios. See, the thing is, you had studios like Disney who would not release that many at all. Like that's the thing. I think they averaged a lot less than that. See, I was going on a rough average of everybody.
I'll look it up.
Well, yeah. See, that's the thing, Jay. In the 70s, what movies that would go as far as theatrical as B features would be your straight to video shit in the 80s and 90s is what I'm trying to say. But like the production of what studios used to put out comparatively, because like what you had all these little smaller boutique companies that were come up because of the B movie craze. New Line Cinema is a great example of that. They went from being, this little art house studio to actually producing full-on theatrical pictures that were produced,
Think about how many direct-to-video Disney did every year. I mean, you would know. You saw them all.
Well, Warner had their own little fucking division for that.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I mean, I'm looking at it's an interesting industry. Let's just put it that way.
All together is like, look at how entertainment has grown. Like, because when you and I were kids, we had 3 networks, and cable didn't even come along until the late 70s. And the first few cable channels we had were stuff like, like TBS, ESPN,
WGN,
CNN, eventually WGN, which was considered a superstation.
Yeah.
You had just a few of them. And then HBO came along, and that really changed shit a lot.
It did. Yeah.
And
The
HBO
minute
came along at the same time as home video. So like
you actually, you have to remember this, Tom. HBO was delivered over a UHF, an encrypted UHF. You had to have a physical box with a knob that you had
my
to turn
uncle
on
had
to get
the old
HBO.
satellite setup, actually.
Yep. Yeah, you had to be, and you had to be able to hit G8? You had to be able to hit one of the two feeds with your dish in your backyard to get HBO. Crazy stuff. And you had to have a transponder that was encoded so you could descramble the signal. It was crazy stuff.
But then when the 90s, when cable took off, like you had hundreds of channels at that point. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So they had to just do a lot more, is what I'm trying to get to, is like the demand for entertainment blew up. And that demand never really went down since then. But like what they have done, though, is continually spend more and more and more and more and more and more on each production. And that was the point I was trying to get to before that was, you know, you had a big movie, it would play for a long time in the theaters.
Yeah.
And that's how they managed to make that kind of money. So if you go by inflation, that's why none of these movies today even come close with inflation half the time. I mean, even some of the bigger films are still like down there.
Star Wars, right? First of all, ticket prices were lower, inflationary pressures were different. But Star Wars played for over a year. A New Hope, the original film, which was called Star Wars, guys.
They even had a special poster and stuff that would go out to theaters that actually played it nonstop for a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. Truly. Yeah. In my day, sonny. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, think about it, though. We have not had a movie like that since Avatar.
Right.
Even Endgame and Star Wars, they were out on video in normal time, right? Like they didn't take any. Avatar was a little bit of a delay, but like
Matrix was one that I would have expected to have run longer. And back in the day, it would have, you know.
Well, it kind of did because it was up against Episode 1. Yeah. See, that was the Matrix ran off this thing where it came out at the exact same time as Episode 1, but it was like a little sleeper hit in comparison. Because I know, like, a lot of people started talking about it, and I got lucky and didn't get it spoiled for me. And I didn't see it till video because like everybody was talking about Star Wars at that point.
Well, I had a screener copy 2 weeks before the film came out, and I was so excited. I told everybody about the film. Great.
But I know a lot of people who went to see that just because they couldn't get into Star Wars.
No, but I had a screener copy of it, and I couldn't stop talking about it.
No, the initial breakout missed me, but yeah, it was I remember that movie was kind of like a little engine that could. We don't have a lot of those anymore.
No,
not like, and they don't allow them to.
Well, hey, the best version of that right now is A Quiet Place 2, right? Because it's been in theaters a long time.
But it's already out on digital as well. So what did they do? Like that's the big. I guess that brings us back to the whole thing where, you know, this guy's right. What's his name again?
Fortean.
You know, where he's not wrong. Like, I mean, I get it. They need to adapt. And this 45-day window is a great way as far as like a basic outline. But they need to encourage the studios to do movies like Avatar again, where like there is like they can play for a while. Right?
Look at this. I mean, this is a studio guy. This is the studio dude, the Sony guy, saying that the day and date model is devastating to the business. They don't want any part of it.
Well, Sony's been one of the only outliers in this whole thing.
I find that, but I just find it telling. I mean, because they could turn around and sell their junk to other people like crazy easy, you know?
Well, okay, let's be real here. Sony has an investment in this that's outside of the digital realm. They have a big investment in Blu-ray still. So they definitely want to stick to the old model. Like that's their bread and butter right there. I mean, they don't want Blu-ray to go away anytime soon.
And neither do I. Neither do I. But I want to own physical media, physical representations of the film that I saw in theaters, right? Which is why I still have the original copies of the original films as they came out on VHS of Star Wars. Because I didn't. First of all, I didn't know that George was going to monkey around with it. But I'm glad I still have them.
Yeah, still happening. I can't wait till 4K 80 gets out there.
That'd be so cool.
But no, you're right, Apex. Like, that's what we're missing. And a lot of those films were not necessarily ever meant to be huge hits. Yeah. Like, the only ones of those that you mentioned there that were kind of predestined was Indiana Jones. like that was
given.
That was like one of the only ones that was kind of a given. Everybody was like, oh, they don't have to do anything but slap on there. It's from Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and everybody will go.
Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and, guess who's starring in this film? I mean, it was a no-brainer.
But yeah, Jaws, Star Wars, even Close Encounters to a point. I mean, yeah, they had some faith in Close Encounters, but like there was still I'm sure there was a point where even Steven wasn't too sure, because he made that world famous bet with George where he got back end points on Star Wars, that George and him made the bet that either's movies would be the bigger one. So
yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, Pat S says, not an exaggeration, there was a suburban theater that had a daily showing of Sound of Music for 6 years. I am not surprised.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, even when video was around still, we still had re-releases.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I would go to the theater to see a film that had been out of the theaters for 4 or 5 years, 10 years sometimes.
I mean, because not everybody had video yet.
And Disney would actually re-release their animated films to theaters.
Well, they were one of the last holdouts for that. Like, that used to be the norm. Like, before home, like, that's the thing is, I know it's hard to believe there was a world before home video. I know it. And studios used to just, like, these films would only have so long of a shelf life, and that's why a lot of this stuff is tossed, is because they just like, oh, well, it didn't do that great in the theaters. We made our money off it. It's played on TV. It's done. So then they just get rid of it. They don't have no future for it.
It's bananas. And
then they realized there's a secondary in these movies were big, especially movies like Disney and stuff like that. Oh yeah, they would re-release them all the time.
You would end up with $60 videotapes, if I remember correctly.
Well, depending on the movie. And this is what I was getting to earlier too, about like the whole deal with the studios only releasing so many movies a year. The other time of the year that they would take up would be the re-releases. They didn't see, that's another thing they quit doing in the 80s. So that's where they had to fill up that space as well. So, they would release X amount of movies a year, but then they would release re-releases as well. So you would have Ghostbusters that would get re-released all the time too for a couple of years after it came out. I just saw a thing the other day about it's the anniversary of the re-release of Ghostbusters,
Right. Yeah. Man. But things definitely change. This is this good question from Jay Allman. I don't know that I agree. Piracy is the reason movies can't play for long in theaters. I don't think. Look, I will go to a theater even if The Matrix was a film I had a screener copy of a couple weeks or maybe longer, way before it made it to theaters, and I still went to see it in the theater. So if the film's good enough, the piracy doesn't become an issue. In fact, you actually may get more audience. I mean, that's some of the argument, I think.
There's a bigger problem with piracy when it's easily accessible in a digital form. Because I think that was, and I know it's probably going to come to the forefront if they go to court, is that Black Widow was the most downloaded movie in history. Well, the reason for that was it was a brand new movie and you could get it in really high quality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Jay, I think you're right here. Movies are vulnerable in every channel, but it's better to make fast, big bucks, isn't it, than to open in small and slow. Well, hey, unless you're Sean Penn, who opened his film on 24 theaters to the grand total of $48,000, basically telling half of his audience he is not interested in their participation.
Well, Sean Penn is like eroded whatever fucking stardom he ever had. But anyhow, no, like, here's one thing, Jay, you're bringing up a point there that I think needs to be addressed. And that is where studios, I think, are being short-sighted. Is we saw it with Trolls earlier this year with Universal when they first started all this shit. And then we're now seeing it with Black Widow. And this is what I was trying to say, is people are kind of misinterpreting what I'm saying, I think. But the studios get this quick injection of like cash, right? And it's like a fucking drug, because when they usually release these movies, it's kind of like a trickle effect, right? Like, sure, you get that first box office weekend, but like you got to share some of that money with certain people, and certain things go out. When they're doing these digital things, they're getting an influx of money like right now, right? Like, it's this quick injection. Sure, it feels like you're getting a lot of money.
It does. Yeah. They call that pulling forward. And that's the problem is it shows like they pulled a bunch of money forward and it bypassed like a certain percentage of obviously their share. They don't have to share quite as much, but they, believe it or not, digitally, they still have to share because it has to get pulled through a platform.
There's still some sharing involved. And that's the thing is not only that, now they've killed their secondary market, right?
No, they destroyed it.
So here's what you have is it's the same as when you win the lottery and instead of taking like, the payment over a long period of time and getting an extremely large amount, you take that lump payment up front and you're not realizing that you're losing out on that much more in the other end, right? Like that's kind of what they're doing to themselves right now is they see this like, oh, we're getting all this money right now. Sure, that's going to last for a little bit and you're going to see it for now. But then when Black Widow drops on video and nobody buys it, that's when they're going to start seeing it. See, that's what I think Universal learned with Trolls.
They did.
Right? Is that they're like, oh, we've got this big influx of money because we went and dropped it on day and date and da-da-da-da-da. Well, now all these people that saw it on digital, they're not going to buy that for their kids because they already own it on digital and or their kids have seen it enough. They don't give a shit anymore. They moved on to the next thing. Because that's the other thing is kids movies are so disposable now compared to what they used to be. You brought up Disney. Like it used to be, we were lucky to get 2 or 3 family films a year. Now you get one every week.
We're getting them way too often, in my opinion. Again, I mean, you make money by having some form of scarcity. It's so funny because so many of these companies own other division or they have other divisions, right? With Disney, it's like theme parks and stuff like that. Their money comes out of scarcity, in every single way along the line, including the availability of your time in the location. They limit the hours of the park. There are physical limits to how many people an attraction can handle. They further limit that by like creating a situation where you have some guests that get immediate access to the attraction through, in Disney's case, Fast Pass, and very soon something called Lightning Lane, which is going to be a pay to play on top of your daily ticket price of $100+, which is disgusting. But so you create this artificial scarcity, and it allows you to charge more, hold your audience's attention more, so on and so forth. So I while it sounds interesting that these companies are coming up with so many films a year, so many different forms of entertainment a year, scarcity makes some of your stuff more popular because there's less of it. And that's the problem with that. I think the streaming services don't get. Some of what made HBO the premium service that it became was because it's the only place you could get this kind of entertainment. It's the only place you get that quality of entertainment. And it oftentimes it's the only place you're going to see anything similar to that kind of entertainment. Even we're going to see that in a theater or any other network. And I mean, sometimes scarcity is good, and it elevates whatever it is you're trying to sell or produce, which is another reason why David Zaslav right now.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what Discovery's been doing, which is why AT&T was happy to, let's do a merger with you guys because you know how to handle this stuff.
Well, yeah, because they've got to have service. But beyond that, like you're right, like the scarcity aspect of it, a big part of it is, okay, movies used to have like this element of must see or word of mouth trickle down effect, right? Like as opposed to now where it's all about that first weekend box office, right? The Marvelization of Hollywood as we've seen it, or the McDonaldization, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Everybody wants one of those. And what is one of those? It's the perfect point you just said with the whole thing with Discovery Plus. What makes it the little engine that could is that everybody who has it's the must have, must watch streaming thing, right? Like, and that's what Marvel did. It made a film series and a film franchise that it was the must see thing, or you feel like you were missing out. Not just seeing in general, but you had to go see it. First weekend, opening night, right away, or you would miss out and you didn't want to get spoiled, or you wanted to be the first one to see it. See, not most movies are like that. And most people don't go to movies like that, right? Like they don't go like on this, like, whim of I gotta go see the opening night, like it used to be guys like us that would do that kind of shit, You know, we were always the nerds who were there opening night with 3 other people, you know, at the first fucking showing. And then it just kind of became the thing to do because of Marvel, I think. I mean, yeah, it kind of started with Star Wars prequels, but I think Marvel's where it really kind of was a solidified thing where then the studios are like, okay, we got to have one of these all the time, right? So then instead of it being one of these special things that happen once in a while, the scarcity aspect of it too, like you're kind of getting to culture, like they're trying to make every movie a Marvel movie event. And it's like, not every movie does that. Not every movie is that. And what we've lost then is this other kind of movie. And I'm not trying to blame Marvel per se, because it's all across the board. It goes back even before Marvel, but it's their own fault. They've killed the movie star. They killed the incentive to just go see regular movies anymore. They don't have any gimmicks left, right? Like, because we all know how it's done now. It used to be like, you know, that was the fun of going to see stuff like Friday the 13th so much. Wasn't, you know, yeah, we get to see some boobs and some violence and Jason hack up some teenagers or whatever. It was more so like, how did they fucking do that? That was the whole reason why Roger Rabbit was a big success. Yeah, the story is what helped the movie live on today. But when that movie first came out, the whole gimmick was, how the fuck did they make us believe that for, you know, 2 hours, cartoon characters and humans existed in the same space, right? Like those kind of things were not, and that's why Star Wars was such a big deal in the day, right? Like, because it was realistic special effects. Before that, we were used to hokey shit on fucking strings and really crappy blue screen, right? Like, we were reaching an era where special effects and the gimmicks of how we're seeing these films, you know, even with surround sound and all the other things that were kind of getting amped up in the 80s and 90s more so than they used to be. I mean, forget about 3D and all that crap. I'm just talking about, like, you know, going up until the digital age. Because then once you hit the computer age, once you get past Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park and the Star Wars prequels and the Matrix, it's all pretty much downhill from there. There's no gimmicks left. Why was Avatar such a big hit? Because it's the only gimmick they had left. It's, you know, right? It's the first time they've been able to finally perfect this 3D where you didn't have to have the stupid blue and red, and it didn't give everybody fucking headaches. And it just happened to be that right time at the right place in history. And they're not doing that anymore. You can't capture that anymore. I don't know what they're going to be able to do to capture that again, but they don't have the tools to do anything like that anymore. They've reached the end of, you know, what they can do to wow an audience, right? Like, so now it's the worst time for you to become fucking bankrupt when it comes to being inspired to tell a story, right? Because now is the time where you could do anything you want, and you've got some of the worst fucking writing we've ever seen in the history of Hollywood.
You can tell the most complicated sci-fi story ever right now because of the availability of movie magic, as E. Clay Thomason says here. I have the perfect property for a decade and a half worth of films or, you know, super uber expensive television show, whatever, that nobody could touch. It's the next Star Wars property. And I everything would be at my disposal that I would need to give you the biggest thing ever. This thing, every single film would clear $2 billion if you just did it in film format, and I could extend it for 15 years or more. You know, and the universe that it exists in is fully fleshed out so that you could even have spin-offs that would make sense, that would take you deeper into this world. If you put it on a streaming service, I would be busy doing 4 or 5 different things at the same time to elevate what could be done. We have the technology to present otherworldly adventures, and we don't have any stories to tell, or at least we don't have any writers telling good stories. I have the perfect adaptable property that I would be more than happy to pay the author for, you know, that would just change everything. It would be our version of this current generation's version of Star Wars. And it would turn everybody away from, you know, the dark side that everybody's, you know, rapidly running towards at the moment. Just anyway, just
but no, like that's the thing though, is we'll never get a Jaws again. We'll never get a Roger Rabbit again. We'll never get a Star Wars again. These things will never happen again for the very specific reason, and this is one thing that is it's sad because it's one of the greatest and worst tools to ever come into existence, and that is computer. Because I'll never hear my dad ever say again, because I didn't get to see a lot of movies with my dad. He doesn't like to go to the theater, but when he does, it's a very rare occasion. Well, I remember seeing Jurassic Park with him, and he was like a little kid, right? He's like, how did they do that? It looks like he was beside himself through the whole movie. And I knew how they did it, right? So I was like living vicariously through my dad. But at that point, little did I realize that this is the end of an era, right? Like, this is it. This is the end of the road. We've reached a point where no longer will anybody go, how did they do that when they watch a movie? Because they know how they did that. We'll never get that awe again. So what do you got to do? You got to give us something that really blows our mind story-wise. Now, get us invested in characters. Give us something we've never seen before with this technology, because otherwise, I've seen all this crap for the last 20 years, and that's why I don't have the investment in half the shit that comes out nowadays like I used to when I was younger, and I'll still gravitate towards older movies, is because the new shit just feels so fake. It feels so just...
Well, there's not a lot of depth. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, on the screen, there isn't the kind of depth that we used to have. I mean, everything ends up looking flat or surreal instead of real. A level of realism in film is it should be expected. If you're trying to tell a violent story, you have to actually have like some real violence there. But they don't even bother anymore with Marvel films or anything else because they're trying to avoid that. They're trying to avoid different types of conflict. They're willing to engage in a story based in propaganda, but they don't want to actually like put in front of you actual conflict. They just don't. I mean, I'm sorry. I think that's one of the problems with the last few Marvel films for me. Or at least the last couple, right?
I mean, the digital age kind of came to an end with Avatar, right? Like, that was kind of the point where we reached, like, that's about as far as we can go with this. I don't know where else we can go from here. I don't know what's next. I really, outside of holographic shit, what else can we do?
Well, we're working on it. That's the thing. I don't think most people
realize.
That's
a gimmick that's only going to work once. Again.
I don't know. I saw some
It'll be fun. Don't get me wrong, Culture. I'm all for it because I love my 3D and all that kind of shit. But
you won't need glasses. You're going to go into a theater that essentially has multiple projectable screens that are going to create a depth and allow you to move and positionally find that the thing that's in front of you has some form of substance.
I'm going to give you a great example. Here's a movie that works despite its gimmick because the gimmick works against it. Jaws.
Oh, yeah.
We will never get a story like that again. We will never get a movie that it doesn't fucking matter. You can take that shark out of the movie completely, and it's still the greatest fucking movie of all time. That would even maybe make the movie better. It could through the entire film, you'd be questioning, is there really a shark?
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. And this is why when I make horror films, you guys will start to see them because that's going to be my jam, kids. And I need to take myself off the screen because I'm buffering. But my jam is the horror stuff. So practical effects, you will absolutely see practical effect films that when I get around to actually getting my stuff made, it's the majority of it will be the physical effects because those are the jaw-dropping things, right? It's like when you found out exactly in the first Jurassic Park movie, right, Tom? There were way more practical effects than you can even imagine.
Yes, there's a hell of a lot more. I think there's only 52 actual digital effects in the first Jurassic Park.
Which you tell somebody that, and they're like, "You're lying," and I'm like, "Nope."
And that's a lot for that time, actually.
It was, but the actors were able to interact physically with things that now are digital. And believe me, that elevates their performance. It's the problem between the ages. It's why they started to bring, you know, an interactable location and screen together for the artists, the actors to act against. That's why the stagecraft tech is important, because there's no reason to post anything, because the actors just they're kind of feel like they're on a location because there's something that they can reference that they're looking at. It's a better way to tell a story. Anyway, we have gone longer than I expected. We are 90 minutes in. I want to say thank you to everybody here, including our friend Tom. Tom, did you have anything else you wanted to throw into the mix before I shut it down?
No, I hope for something on the horizon. I think that's why things like Cobra Kai are so popular, because it's good damn storytelling. Doesn't need a bunch of effects, and Hollywood should take note. Right? I mean, I can't remember if it was Tom Conkle or Gary Tunnicliffe who said this, but it is so true. Like, you know, your movie just has to be as good as Avengers, right? Like, whichever one panicked when they heard that. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you're competing for 2 hours of people's time. To them, you know, they pay the same amount to see a movie no matter what it is. So as long as it's as entertaining as Avengers, that's all that matters. Well, guess what? You don't have to have $200 million to make an entertaining movie. You know, some of my favorite films are not huge, like fucking blockbuster level fucking shit, right? Like Jaws is kind of an expensive film, but look at Halloween. The movie was made for next to nothing, right?
Right.
Great fucking movie. Great movie. You know, all you got to do is tell a good story. And that's where we've reached a point where, okay, you can do whatever the hell you want. Now we should be getting the best stories ever. Right. And that's the point you were kind of making too. And
you started off that point. I just went and embellished the hell out of it, because I think there's no doubt that we should be in a renaissance when it comes to film and storytelling for films in general. We should be living in a renaissance of great cinema. It's stuff that would blow your mind. And so, because we don't have good storytellers, because nobody tells a story anymore, that's what we end up with. You know what? I want to get your comment on something. I wasn't gonna do this. I just was curious. Is this a company shooting itself in the foot?
Oh, are you kidding? Of course it is.
Any idea why they would do that?
Somebody found God at the wrong moment.
Well,
I don't know. I really don't, to be honest with you.
Look, this story is now going on, 4 or 5 days old.
Look, the only way I could understand this is if they're trying to head off, and I'm going to try and say this as delicately as possible. If there is some like illegal something or other that happened on this site that is going to come to light in soon, and they're just trying to head it off, that's the only reason I could see this happening. If you get my drift. I'm not going to insinuate what, because I have no clue what, but you kind of get what I'm getting at. Like, the only reason I could see a company like this basically committing suicide or self deletion.
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, seriously. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, look, the CEO said, and this is the original article that all of this information came from, going back several days now, is from this Financial Times article, right? Essentially, Tim Stokely claiming that they had no choice but to change the way they did business.
See, that tells me they're telegraphing something's on the horizon.
Unfair treatment from banks. Now, again, the site is not based in the States. It's based in the UK. So it seems like this is the best place to get information. So it will no longer allow sexually explicit content starting October 1st. The London-based company said the decision was made to comply with the requests of its banking and lending partners. But first of all, how do they have lending partners?
Why do they need money from anybody?
Yeah, I think their profit is nearly $2 billion.
Well, this reminds me of a platform that we're on right now, right? Where they like to claim, "Oh, we don't make any money."
Yeah, well, that's not what's happening here. Their investment partners are probably the ones that want to get out, so they wanted to take the company public. But they built this on the backs of people who, take their clothes off for money, like Amber Rose and Bella Thorne and many others that have joined for, very specific reasons, and this company has only been around since 2016. So it essentially saying this is what he claims, right?
I see.
JP Morgan Chase, Bank of New York Mellon, and Metro Bank were a few of the banks that have pushed back against this kind of entertainment on their platform, which is essentially why they grew. And he says specifically, this is his quote, JP Morgan Chase, Stokely said, was particularly aggressive in closing the accounts of the workers.
This sounds like an SJW move, like a motherfucker.
Well, guess what? Guess who leads the charge in this effort and is dramatically trying to reshape business in a more authoritarian and socialist way. I have them highlighted on the screen.
Gee, I wonder. Are they? Yeah. Anyway, this is kind of making more sense.
Anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I didn't
trying
get a
to
chance.
think about how to word this shit.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, this thing makes money, and it always has. And I mean, Hugh Hefner made a lot of money.
I was just gonna compare it to like this is about like the time when Playboy said we're not gonna have nudes anymore.
Yeah, and guess what happened?
No more Playboy.
By then. Anyway,
yeah, it's like Burger King going, you know what? We're gonna quit making burgers. No more Whoppers, no more cheeseburgers. Only chicken.
Yeah. Hey, how about this? Find different financial partners, dumbasses. There's plenty of billionaires out there in the world that would be more than happy. I was just
gonna ask. I wonder who is partners with Love Hub.
I don't know, but I can tell you this much: they do a little bit of like background on the content that's being submitted. Maybe, and again, that's the claims is that OnlyFans didn't want to put those things in place. But it is what it is. But we got to get out of here.
Not to drag it out, but no, Mecha J is right. Like, yeah, that only was a stupid move on their part, Mecha J. Like, that's the thing that's where we've entered the point where. I think that was where we entered the point where I really realized, okay, this woke thing is completely off the rails, right? Like, you got they're trying to talk about like this, sexual revolution or sexual openness and all this other bullshit, but yet they shutting down everything and anything that's remotely,
Again, I mean, like
I'm not getting into this. Sorry, but you know where I'm getting from.
I do, and it's weird, man. We live in the strangest place in the universe.
Well, I said the only way this makes sense is if there's something woke behind it. Because
of course, I just pointed it out. I could not have been more clear, and you'll have to read between the lines because I do like my channel. Tom, let's do this. Let's tell everybody what you have going on later today and where I might
Lord
actually
only
possibly be.
Fucking knows. I've got Mead coming up here in a couple hours. I've got a video I was supposed to edit for Andre that I haven't even touched, and I'm sure he's going to have another one for me before too long. And then what is it, Tuesday? Shit. Mead, and then who knows? Lord only knows.
Right. Well, I'm going to try to drop in on Mead. I thank you and Andre for the invite. And I actually might do a weird live stream at some point because there's something that I might get to do later today. I'm very excited about. Other than that, I have a new outro. I want to see if it works. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate all of you. I'll end the show the way I always do. Be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, wash your hands, of course, because it's good hygiene. It really is. And until next time,
I like donuts.
Good. Bye.
Hey, it's not blowing my eardrums out.
This will be getting updated today, by the way. This is getting updated because there's a couple names that are missing here.
Enjoy Culture Casino's fine ripoff of Red Hot Chili Peppers.